Hi, in this video I wanted to show you how to create mocks where you're gonna get different responses for the same URL. Okay, so the URL on the requests are going to be the same, but you're going to be receiving different responses from Traffic Parrot. So there's two ways to do that. The first one is using dynamic responses, and it sometimes involves a bit of request matching. And the second one is using purely request matching. So let's look at the dynamic responses first of all. So what we're going to do is create a simple request to response matching here. I'm going to say as like a create endpoint, and we're going to be simulating creating users here. So let's say the request got a username, and the username can be Bob, and the response is a HTTP 200 response, and the response looks like this: ID 1, and just repeat that username. Okay, save that, and there we go. There's our mapping. Oh, sorry, I haven't said that the request should be equal to JSON. Username Bob. Yeah, there we go. There we go, equal to JSON. So now we can test this using Postman. I'm just going to send a request to /create and pass in the JSON with username Bob, and I'm getting a response ID 1, username Bob. Amazing. So what happens if I pass in Sam now? No responses match the given request. What's going on here? Let's have a look. So we're going to look at Traffic Parrot logs, virtual service logs, and scroll to the very bottom. And what we see here is that there was a request received to post/create, and it was a bunch of headers there, but the body was username Sam, and this request did not match pattern, the pattern we have configured. And why is that? Well, the URL matched, the method matched, everything matched apart from the body. So the body did not match just because we're saying that the body should be equal to this JSON and the username is Bob, but we're passing in username Sam. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. So I recommend going to Traffic Parrot documentation, go to request matching. So we need to match this request. I'm gonna go to HTTPS, and look at how to match the JSON body. Right now we're using equal to JSON, but looks like what we need to use is matches JSON, and use this special token to match any value. Instead of matching the username Bob, we're going to match any value. Okay, so let's go back to that mapping. Instead of Bob, we're going to say it's any value. Save that and test it again using Postman. Oh, that's not working. What's going on there? Refresh it. Scroll to the very bottom. The body still did not match. We haven't changed this, so it still says equal to JSON. So what we need to do is change it, instead of equal to JSON, to matches JSON, just because that's what the documentation says. We need matches JSON if we're going to use any of these tokens. Okay, save that. Hopefully it works now. Yeah, so we're getting our response, but the response got a username Bob in it. Why is that? Well, because that's the hard-coded value that we've got here in the response body. So how do we make this dynamic? Let's make it based on the request. So what we'll do is go back to documentation, go to dynamic responses, and we want to use the request data in the response. So we're going to use something from the request body. So there's going to be a request.body, but we want to extract bits of information from the request body, which is JSON. So let's look at something to help us with parsing the JSON. So we can see here is we got JSON path. If you don't know what JSON path is, I recommend following this link and learning a bit more. It's quite powerful. and it's used across many different platforms, not only Traffic Parrot. And what we've got here is an example of how to use JSON path to, in our case, extract bits of information from the request body JSON. Okay, I'm just copying that. I'm gonna go to the mapping, and in the response, instead of Bob, I'm gonna say use JSON path handlebars helper to extract from the something from the request body, and it's not full bar, but it's going to be the username. Okay, so now when we test that, whatever user we pass in the request, we're getting it back in the response. So you see, we've got the same URL all the time, but the responses are different. But the difference here is that the requests we're sending actually are different. The URL is the same, but the request bodies are different. Okay, so that's how the response is different, just because it's dynamic and based on the request. We can also add some randomness to it, for example. So going back to our dynamic responses, we could say that the user ID is dynamic. So we're gonna say, instead of 1, I'm gonna say it's an integer between 10 and 100, and see how that goes. There we go. So right now, whenever we create the username Ami, we're getting a response back with a different ID. So now we're sending the same request with the same body, but the response is actually dynamically generated based on the request, but also it's got some randomness to it. So 2 identical requests, different responses. Well, assuming you're getting a different number here, there's still a chance that you're going to get the same number. Okay, so this is a very simplistic example, but I hope you get the point. You can use a lot of dynamic values here in your responses, so please have a look at this documentation, and I also recommend having a look at the dynamic responses tutorial. Okay, all right, so we saw how we can use dynamic responses to generate to return different types of responses based on the request, and that allows you to have the same URL but different responses. But there's also another way to have the same URL but different responses, and that's request matching. So how does that work? Well, I recommend reading how Traffic Parrot does request matching here. But basically what happens is Traffic Parrot goes through all of the mappings it has on its list and tries to match the first one, and if it matches, it just returns it. So let's try and use that mechanism. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this mapping that we've got here and edit the first one and say that we're going to match Bob here. And we're going to say that the response is actually 500. It's an error response. And we're going to say error. Can't create user. No more details. Okay. So we've got 2 mappings here. So when we send a request to Bob, it's going to Traffic Parrot is going to go through this list and match the first one. When it's not Bob, it's going to not match on the first one because the body is not going to match, and it's going to go to the second one and use the one we've already had from the demo just a couple of minutes ago. Okay, so let's say we're still sending Amy, we're still getting the same response. We're sending Sam, we're still getting the same response. And now what we can do is send Bob. Can't create user, 500 error. Okay, so you can see we've got still the same URL but totally different responses. And the way we've done it is using a request matching, and the fact that Traffic Parrot will go through the list of request to response mappings here and match the first one that matches. Okay. All right, so I hope this was useful. So just to clarify again what we've demonstrated how we can return different responses for the same URL using two methods. First of all, the dynamic responses. Second of all, request matching, the fact that you can have many mappings for the same URL. All right, thanks for watching, and if you have anything else you'd like to see, please comment down below, and see you soon. Bye.